Last week, Blizzard released World of Warcraft Classic, the eagerly awaited version of its immortal WoW MMORPG, running on final product vanilla patch before the release of any of its 7 expansions. Although WoW has ruled as the king of the MMO genre for 15 years ever since its release, it's failed to reach the heights of popularity at which it peaked roughly 10 years ago, and, in response to some fervent appeals from many loud fans, it decided to do something truly incredible: provide special servers running an outdated patch of an entirely online-only game. Considering the hype and expectations for the release of WoW Classic, if you knew nothing else about WoW except for this recent news, you might expect that the original WoW was a much better game compared to the current version, that the game has only progressed backwards since its release, and this old version is a superior game. That's an interesting thought, since good, better, bad, and worse are extremely subjective terms and ideas anyway, especially when it comes to things like entertainment. Too many people don't realize that whether or not you like something is often completely independent of its actual quality. Its qualities, plural, on the other hand, are far more important for determining enjoyment, how much enjoyment you get out of that entertainment. And that's the crux of the issue of comparing WoW Classic to modern WoW. The thing is, Blizzard has had 15 years to perfect World of Warcraft, and it's continued to evolve not only with the whims of its creators, but with the improving technology and programming capabilities of our ever-changing world. Over 15 years, WoW has been updated with a huge amount of quality of life improvements that, looking at the matter as objectively as possible, would have to be considered advancements that make the game better. On a strictly scientific level, modern WoW is a better game, and not every WoW player was clamoring for Classic. The dissenting sentiment was well examined by my best friend, Jinx Black, his wife. The two have been playing WoW together for over a dozen years, and his wife, who mains a hunter, reacted to the announcement of Classic WoW in a way that can be summed up thusly. You want me to play a version of WoW where I have to keep a separate bag specifically for my ammo and keep that stocked up, not to mention more space in my other bags for food just to keep my pet fed? A version where I have to track down pets all across the world and tame them, just so I can learn better skills for the pets that I actually want? No, thank you. I think I'm good. There are many besides this, too. Of course, there are all sorts of, just besides the hunter-centric quality of life changes, WoW Classic is an exercise in frustration. Remember the old days when you had the ability to fail at gathering if the resource was orange? That was a fun time. Remember all the money that had to be spent on training and getting abilities? There are so many less travel points and flight paths. You had to take much longer treks to get from here to there. One of the things that I didn't remember was, oh yeah, no boat to Darnassus from Stormwind. No, you can't say that WoW Classic was a better game. But if that's really the case, just what is going on here? Why is there so much hype and excitement for an outdated and inferior version of the same game people are already playing? Why are the starting zones so swamped at launch that all you could behold was a sea of nearly identical characters, and perhaps a forest of blue names, so swamped you couldn't get a kill for a single quest mob without making an appointment? Why, that evening, and after a few server resets on some of them, were we treated to login queues that numbered in the thousands on the less populated servers? 5-digit numbers supposedly on the more populated ones? Why all of this fervor for a piece of history? Well, while the old game of Classic may not have been better, it was different. And for some, that difference made the game more enjoyable. This video is intended as a kind of retrospective of mine, from my memories of early WoW and why I'm so excited to get back into it here, even after all the changes and all this time. This is my take on vanilla WoW. I was one of the original people who played WoW at vanilla launch, after months of anticipation myself. I was raised on tabletop role-playing games. My father and I were pulled into EverQuest by an old RPG buddy of his who lived across the country, wanted something that he could do online with his friend in order to simulate to get back some of that role-playing experience, since he couldn't sit at the table with us and roll dice anymore. I played some EQ myself through high school, and then WoW launched relatively soon after my graduation, at least the first opportunity I had after graduation to have my own computer and my own games. Shortly before that, between EverQuest and the launch of WoW, my dad and I played around with a few other MMOs, like City of Heroes, Dark Ages of Camelot, but WoW was what we were anticipating. We had both really enjoyed Blizzard's Diablo and StarCraft franchises. We'd done some with Warcraft, but those two were more prominently in our mind. And we were very excited for what Blizzard could do with the MMO genre. After all, their MO was to take a genre that was already really good and fun and find all the ways to improve it and make it better. And we were satisfied. We thoroughly enjoyed the game. Neither of us were very hardcore MMO players. We never really did much in the way of endgame content in EverQuest without a little bit of help from the guild that we were in. We never knew how to go out looking for those kinds of endgame experiences, but we really did enjoy just playing WoW. I myself only made 60 shortly before the release of Burning Crusade, so it is clear that obviously we didn't play it passionately, but I will insist that I did play it regularly. But with each of the first two expansions, I did get progressively more into WoW, until the peak at the end of Wrath of the Lich King. I never went raiding really in Wrath of the Lich King. I was barely able to get into some of the heroic dungeons, but I was finally able, with the help of a friend, to do some raiding in Cataclysm. And then later when I returned in Legion, I did some raiding there. But that's never really been the big focus of me, so I'm not that bent out of shape over missing the raiding experience at the time. But I enjoyed the game in all sorts of other ways, despite, some of the flaws that I saw in the game, the problems that I had with it. There were a few, but for a time, I said that WoW was my favorite computer game. It's the one I had the most fun with, even though I'm an antisocial person and largely played solo if I wasn't playing with my dad or some of my other friends and family. But from Cataclysm onward, Blizzard started to do a number of things to the game in the midst of their improving it that eventually ruined my enjoyment of the game. I haven't played Modern WoW since the middle of Legion, and I only came back to Legion after I'd already left at the beginning of Mists of Pandaria, and missed essentially 2 full expansions. Some of the things that drove me away were somewhat common complaints that dropped the population from the end of the Wrath and beginning of Cata Peaks, but some of them are kind of unique to me. One of the things that got to me more was the storytelling aspect of the game. Starting lightly with Wrath and accelerating in the subsequent expansions, WoW started to expand its storytelling with cinematics, and getting deeper into the primary characters of the Warcraft lore, showing them in these great movie scenes. It would have been fine in a normal game. We've seen all sorts of similar progressions in video games, cross-platforms. But as time has gone on, this embrace of the cinematics has been kind of a big symbol of what I see as WoW's downfall. Originally, the developers said that the world of Warcraft, the world itself, was supposed to be the main character. It was in the title. And it is something that we, the original explorers of the game, genuinely felt. We began as little neophytes who were trying to protect small towns and villages from bandits and wild beasts. Eventually we moved on to the big cities and to the more exotic wild out there places, finding mysteries and helping defeat greater and grander threats. But then as the expansion started to grow, as the characters began to become more powerful, taking down mighty foe after legendary foe, many players began to see themselves as primary characters, as the protagonists in the story too. And for a time, WoW embraced that ideal as well. But as they grew more obsessed by delivering a more epic experience with these new cinematics of theirs, they were forced to shunt the player characters to the side. It's only to be expected. It's kind of what comes with the territory. After all, WoW is a massively multiplayer online role-playing game, and it's delivering this experience to millions of players. And it cannot design a cinematic to take one of a million possibilities of permutations of a main character and insert them into that cinematic. So what could they do instead? All they could do is pull open the characters that were available in Warcraft lore and give them a starring role. And at first, that was perfectly fine. But in a way, it started after a time, and especially as the conflicts grew more intense, it started to really lose the flavor of the game and how it was a world that we affected and that we lived in. After all, since we can't be in the cinematics that express these raw emotions and epic events, there's just no way to integrate us into it. We can't feel the same feelings, and the feelings that are intended to be promoted we may not really feel, especially if our ideologies don't mix with the ideologies of the characters who are supposed to be on our faction that we're seeing represented in the cinematics, or if we believe that we would handle something differently. And this becomes a big matter as the expansions grow and our characters become more powerful. By the current expansion of modern WoW, we have overcome demons and saved Azeroth multiple times. We've destroyed the armies of the Lich King, vanquished Outlands. We've done all of this. Without our characters, the World of Warcraft would not be here anymore. And yet we have no say or influence on our leaders. They have attempted recently, from what I have been watching in the videos of the story of Battle for Azeroth, they've been trying to implement a little bit of this idea into their storytelling, but it still falls far short of what we would expect to be able to accomplish as main protagonists, particularly as main protagonists that we design. Instead, our characters are Final Fantasy characters who don't even get to appear in the scene. The big guns of the World of Warcraft are just being represented and doing all of that, and it's just grown more aggravating, particularly since the story has continually returned to and has been more and more strongly embracing the moronic Alliance versus Horde debacle and experience, whatever you want to call it, dynamic. It's something that I have always hated about World of Warcraft, and I could go to great lengths about why I hate the Alliance and Horde factions, but that's not the point of this video. But the point is that that's just made it all the harder to be part of the story and feel myself part of it when the leaders of both sides are going at each other. And it has been ever since in the story, ever since Thrall was the big damn hero killing Deathwing with the Dragon Soul, well, we played around killing pus pockets on his back. In Vanilla WoW, the faction split is still there, and it's still preventing me from playing my favorite Alliance characters alongside the favorite Horde characters of some of my friends. But at the very least, Vanilla Classic WoW returns us to a time when we could think of all that being in the background and just basically ignore it. And as for the actual epic scenes of the story that were playing out, they were in dioramas that we could participate in. Who still remembers walking down the streets of Stormwind and heading to the throne room to expose Onyxia? The story aspect aside, many people were excited by the idea of Classic because they feel the improvements to the game have made it too easy, which is rather actually an interesting and kind of hilarious idea. WoW was never intended to be a difficult try-hard game. It was designed to be a quality-of-life-centric MMO from the outset. That was Blizzard's MO. They intentionally looked at all the things other MMOs didn't do well, or things in them that frustrated people, and they tried to improve on them and get rid of those frustrating things. And largely, they did succeed. They were Blizzard. It seems harsh now that difficult, this classic WoW, made people think, oh, that is the harder time, but did you play any MMOs before WoW? Do you remember having absolutely no fast travel options, except for begging a high-level NPC to use an expensive reagent to teleport you to another continent? Do you remember losing experience, and even, yes, levels, whole levels, to dying, and then having to go to your corpse to recover your equipment? Do you remember not really knowing what a quest was, having to type in code words to learn what a quest was, but not having any kind of tracker to determine you were on it, of not knowing what possible use a particular strange item that dropped might be for, because you aren't actually on the quest, but now you can complete it, if you can find it. If you answered yes to any of those things, then congratulations, you played an ancient MMO even harder than Classic WoW. There's a reason that practically every MMO that came after it, and was inspired by it, and mimicked it in most, if not all, of its general formula of interface and questing, loot, progression. But somehow, Blizzard lost its way, and a lot of its fans and its players and their player base and their attempts to actually improve the game. I think that really comes down to the other conflict between the player base, the one between the casual players and the raiders. Each side accused Blizzard of favoring the other side, while Blizzard was really trying to appease both, but that ended up driving many people away. Hardcore players left the game in trickles over the expansions because the quality of life improvements and Blizzard's attempt to make raiding more accessible seemed to be muddying up the waters, watering it down rather, making it easier. Raids became dumbed down and trivial. They missed the chaos of the massive 40-man raids and headbanging on wall difficult progress in order to get further into the raids. Casuals like me never had any part of that. We never really experienced that. Probably didn't really want to. But the things that WoW did to make our lives easier and to make things easier to get into raiding ended up destroying the charm of a game world that wasn't optimized for our ease of experience. The openness of original classic WoW gave us things that didn't make sense, things we had to discover, things that allowed us to play the game in a myriad of ways and adjust our playstyle to our liking. Cataclysm was the beginning of the end for me, because of the significant changes they wrought on the game that continued in Mists of Pandaria. While the base parts of gameplay became better, with shards and the instant terrains and parts of zones that would give progression as you went through quests and actually show change, the kinds of quality of life things that we keep talking about, the more this seemed to be moving forward, the more it actually destroyed the charm of the original game. One thing that I loved about WoW that is now extinct in the modern game is the talent system. Blizzard eventually got rid of talents in order to favor the raiders, because when it came down to it, raiders tended to be, because of the sheer difficulty of raiding that to the hardcore players love so much and think back on so much, is that because it was so hard, raid leaders became elitist jerks that had a set amount of things that were required for the raid to run optimally. And if you didn't fit that criteria, being the wrong class, wrong talent spec, not the right talents, perfectly assembled, the exact tree they wanted, you couldn't be a part of the raid. That wasn't all of them, of course, I'm sure. I had no experience with raiding, but these are the stories I've heard, and this is what Blizzard has said in their public announcements when they did the changing to talents in both Cataclysm and later in Pandaria. What they seemed to think was that they actually seemed to grow rather despondent over the fact that these talents weren't being used properly by the end game raiders. What was the point of having talents if everybody was just going to have the same talents? Never mind that these elitist jerks, these hardcore raiders, were literally the 1%, because, among other things, they were only the ones who were max level and only the ones who were doing the max level content. They were not the majority of players on WoW. If they were, then I never would have had problem gathering materials for all of my many alts. But no matter how much they enjoyed talents or liked them, because the talents weren't being used properly or in any useful way by the raiders because they were stuck at something, they had to be done away with. Personally, I enjoyed the talents. No, I adored the talent system. I absolutely loved it, and I loved those games that came after it, like Star Wars The Old Republic, that at first perfectly emulated that. I loved the feeling of progression that came from selecting talents. Yes, I even enjoyed buying the stupid upgraded ranks to the abilities. It's so much nicer in modern WoW because you don't have to buy any of that. You save so much money. It's unbelievable. But every 2 levels, you would get at least one spell and usually several. And that would be an improvement to your character, and you'd have to go and do that, and you know that it happened. In modern WoW, the abilities just come to you and appear on your bar, and you don't have to do something with them, and wow, it's kind of neat, but there's little discovery there. You're immediately trying to fiddle with it, sometimes in the middle of combat. It just doesn't feel the same. And, with the talent specifically, every level meant that something was happening, even if it was just a 1% little boost to an ability, and I got to choose that, do it myself. I loved making those small strides every level. Even if, as the developers later said in their statements to justify the change, that 1% is essentially meaningless, and all these bonuses are just baked into the class redesigns from MoP onward, they meant something to me. When I rolled my first main, a Pally, I knew nothing about the talents or optimizations or what raids expected or what have you. I just looked over the talents and saw these cool abilities. I decided that I wanted to look at one and choose that. I saw the Holy Shield ability near the bottom of the protection tree, and I thought, that sounds like a really cool ability. It will both protect me and do damage, and that is neat, and that's what I want my paladin to be. And that's what I work towards. After I spent the points to make sure that I could cast healing spells with minimal interruption, because I played EQ, and I learned the hard way what happens when you try to heal in the middle of fights. I had that personal discovery, and with every alt tune I rolled, I had that same feeling of progression, slowly building towards a goal that I set for myself. But when talents were done away with, it was so much harder to see the progression you were really making. You learned abilities automatically and could look at them in your spellbook, but it wasn't the same to me. Maybe it was just too different. I'm too much of an old fogey, because I'm sure that New players who started after Mists of Pandaria who were getting all those were equally excited looking in their spellbook and saying, oh, at level 40, I'm going to get this cool ability. That sounds neat. I can't wait to get to 40. But it just didn't feel the same to me. For me, the development became empty, and the talent trees that were used in MoP to replace it were a total joke. They were improved a bit by Legion, but still, they were rather insignificant. I reach level 20 with a hunter, and I get to choose something that my disengage now has an effect with, an ability that I almost never use, because it's usually dangerous to me. I'm so excited to get that. And these things really were largely the same. They had no value, because if they actually had important value between them, if the differences were significant enough to really be important, raid leaders would have to dictate which one was the best, and they had to avoid that. So because of that, the talents became meaningless fluff for the large part. Another thing about modern WoW was the newbie experience itself. In the zones, it's changed, all because of Kata. I hadn't really thought much about that aspect of it, especially since I'd been largely absent from the game since Kata, and I didn't get involved in even leveling characters in Kata, and I never really knew why. Just once Kata hit, even though it had all these neat new zone experiences, they just turned me off, and I couldn't really understand totally why. Partially because the talents were halved, I wasn't making as much progression, and I felt that, but there was something else. Well, Bellular Gaming had a video about it, and when he was one of his recent ones talking about Classic and how the feel of it differs from modern WoW. And he noted how the world changed in Kata and how that dated it to the Kata expansion, essentially. See, in vanilla WoW, in classic WoW, each of these zones has their own flavor, their own story, their own background. You progress in the storyline to Defias Bandits in Elwyn Forest. You have to deal with threats to Dun Morog to Ironforge and Karanos here in Dun Morog. Each of these things is its own self-contained part, and sometimes they cross over into other aspects, how the Defias are in Elwyn Forest and then in Westfall. But once the Cataclysm hit, the Kata expansion turned all of these zones into parts of the Kata expansion, if that makes sense. Everything was about the Cataclysm, and pretty much every quest in the zone and everything you had to do was viewed in the lens of, oh, because of the Cataclysm, now these guys have rumbled to the surface, and they're causing us problems now, and you need to go deal with them. It was all well and good and new and cool during the expansion, because now all the zones are different, and all the experienced players, they can, when they play their new alts over again, they get to experience stuff that's kind of the same, but it's been improved, the quests are new, they're giving better, all these quality of life improvements, you're getting actual equipment that makes sense, like pants that give intelligence and spirit that are cloth instead of strength and spirit, which was useless for a cloth wearer. All these things were better, and it was great. But that didn't hold up after the expansion. It started to age and date even faster than Vanilla's zones did. The cracks were beginning to show even during Kata because of the Outrend and Northrend zones, the Burning Crusade and Wrath of the Lich King expansion zones, because the entire world was reshaped to be taking place after Wrath of the Lich King, after all of this had happened. Characters that were introduced in these two expansions have come down to Azeroth and are now being involved in some of these other reworked zones and things. But then when you're a brand new character, a brand new player who hadn't played before Cataclysm, coming into these zones and then going to Outland and to Northrend, is going to find a disconnect in the story, because the things that they experienced with these characters as young newbies no longer applies now that they're suddenly heroes entering Outlands. And that disconnect just really dates the thing. And so now, after 2, 3, 4 expansions, the disconnect is just widened. Now the entire opening of the world, your first 60 levels in the world of Warcraft in Azeroth, take place in the expansion of Kata. And need we remind you that the Kata expansion has been considered one of WoW's worst expansions, and now you have to endure 60 levels of that? Even with reworking in recent zones, that hasn't made it better, especially for people like me who absolutely detest the anti-role-playing, grinding, leveling up experience of having the world level with you. As I say, I never really realized until I was watching Bellular's video just why, even during my brief return during Legion, I just never felt it never felt good to be playing my alts to try to level them. It just became a chore to me. But largely it's because of this, because the world was ruined really by the cataclysm and even that newbie experience that I love so much and the feel of old WoW. Apart from this, it's just the general roughness of classic WoW that has a charm that the child glove handling quality of life improvements have removed. Classic WoW and then its first two expansions that followed it still largely qualified in the same vein. And they had thousands of great memories for me of the epic adventures that I had trying to level my characters in these places, in these tough rules. I remember being over-leveled in the Scarlet Monastery, not like super over-leveled. My best friend and I were playing two characters about level 45, and the zone was level 40 at maximum as we went into the cathedral. So since we were that high level, we figured we could probably two-man this, and we tried to do it. So we got into the final fight with Whitemane. And because of the extra ads and stuff and the inability to both heal and hold aggro, my mage finally died. And my best friend's paladin was left all alone to try and battle. And because she was a super survivable healing paladin, his female character was holding on to dear life and fighting on. And I rezzed and was trying to run back into the instance. And this feeling is something that just doesn't exist in modern WoW anymore. You can't really be over-leveled to a dungeon that much since they level with you now, and you're not allowed to go back into a dungeon when there's a battle in place. But my friend fought on hoping I'd return after rezzing in order to help him out, but he was just about out of resources, used Divine Shield, used everything else. He says, all I've got left is Lay on Hands, I'm about to die. And that cooldown's too long, so I'm not going to use it. And I was like, use it. I'm entering the cathedral building right now. I'm right behind you. I'm about to cast my spell. So we used Lay on Hands, and we managed to overcome Whitemane and kill her, and we did it. We conquered Scarlet Monastery with just the two of us. There were other times in other parts of WoW, including the expansions. I remember running Halls of Lightning with a group, 5 of us, all of our friends. Non-heroic Halls of Lightning, but a level 80-ish dungeon, 78 level dungeon. We were all fresh 80s, and didn't know much about raiding or high-level dungeon content, or, even at the time we still didn't know the best thing about party composition, so we had our group of 2 hunters and 3 paladins. 2 of us paladins were protection spec'd, largely. And we went into the final battle against Loken, and Loken wiped the entire party except for us 2 protection paladins. But we held on and we fought, and by alternatingly tanking and healing ourselves up, and then swapping back when the other person got too low so he could try and heal himself back up, we managed to 2-man Loken down and finish him off. And it's something that is just really hard to have happen in modern WoW anymore. Those things don't happen. But any old-time player of classic WoW, the first couple expansions, has a dozen memories like these. But WoW is not really an MMO anymore. It's a phone game. You play with your desktop. You log in. You do your various daily quests to do your daily things. You make a little progress with one of your little tunes or things. You collect a few goodies. You pay a little bit of extra money for that extra little skin or fancy thing you like. And then you log off and continue on with your day. It's just not the same anymore. And I am not really a hardcore gamer by any means. I am one of those guys who, I will admit it, I'm a single player. When I play single player games, I will use cheats to customize the experience to my liking so I can succeed at the level I want to succeed at. And you can say something about how it's childish and making up your own rules for solitaire just so you can win the game. But it's what I enjoyed, and it was much better for me than trying to beat my head against a wall and accomplish something that just is beyond my ability. That isn't fun. I'm supposed to have fun playing the game, so I will do that. But even so, modern WoW, or classic WoW I should say, had something about it that just made the work worth it. I found pleasure in that work that was required to succeed in WoW. And again, because I wasn't very good and wasn't super driven on those things, I generally didn't do some of the highest hardcore level content. But I did plenty of things that were a struggle to get through and that took some time and effort, like becoming a member of the Mithril Order with my blacksmith main. And, this is not something that I say lightly. because I always mocked people who played The Sims, because my point of view on that kind of was, I slave all day at my job and it's hard, and I go home and I want to forget about that and relax, and so I play a harder game, play a game that emulates the same thing, slave away at my virtual job as well. Just didn't make sense to me. But WoW, classic WoW, was just excellent at rewarding your work and making your little accomplishments seem to matter, and giving you carrots all along the way, no matter how many sticks you ran into. After a week, classic WoW is still going strong. For better or worse, even these zones are overpopulated with people and make it hard to complete some quests, but it means that this does have a fan base that's staying around. So many people who forgot just how many quality of life bonuses didn't exist in Classic have stuck with it regardless. It's booming and showing no sign of slowing down. And I'm in the middle of it, still progressing slowly, but once again building a guild of close family and friends to enjoy it with me, just as I did back in the day. It's still that favorite game of mine that I once answered to those things. You'll probably never see WoW Classic raid videos from me. But that's okay, because this is a game that I can casually enjoy with those close friends and family in order to relax from the exhaustion of my daily life. I'll see you online.